All right, let me jump into a little bio here. Hopefully, I do a good job. And Mallory, please fill in any spots on your bio if you would. But again, we're excited to have Mallory back. We've been working with LaborIQ for a number of years. Mallory, PhD, chief economist at LaborIQ down in Dallas, Fort Worth area. She's been an economist with 2M Research and a senior economist at Economic Systems for a few years as well. And I think you're also a professor for a bit, Louisiana State?
Yes, I worked at LSU in a research center, which is like my introduction to living in the South as someone who was originally from the Northeast, went to school at Syracuse. And the revelation that I didn't need to wear snow boots for 6 months a year was a good one.
Love it. Yeah, Syracuse, you get quite the snow up there. All right, so with that, I'm excited to turn it over to Mallory. She's going to help us understand the crazy, unexplainable labor market and all things labor force today. And please engage with Mallory. This is our chance to talk to thought leaders and experts once a month. So, Mallory, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Chuck and Fiona and COO Forum. Happy to be back. So as Chuck mentioned, I'm the chief economist at LaborIQ, where I lead our data team. I'm a member of our commercial leadership team. I'm also on our product team. I lead the teams that produce forecasts and insights into the labor market, especially related to hiring and compensation. In addition to kind of my tactical day-to-day jobs, as a leader in the company, I also speak to groups like this, and I also speak to groups related to HR and talent acquisition leaders to help them really process and understand what's going on in the labor market so that they can bring actionable insights and thought leadership back to their teams, their leadership, their organizations to strategize on their compensation and hiring plans in the future. I also write a monthly labor market column for ERE and really just try and get out there, speak about the labor market and how it relates to hiring and turnover and all of the challenges facing businesses today from a people perspective. I also will caution, as Chuck mentioned, I had a few technical difficulties this morning, so I can actually not see anyone's face. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to just not shout them out, but just say what you have to say. I'm used to it. I have a PhD in economics. Economic seminars can be pretty feisty. Hopefully we don't get feisty here, but I'm certainly used to having a lively discussion and questions throughout the presentation. I think it provides a lot of value. So I know that y'all will come with some really interesting questions related to your industries and locations.
Mallory, we will get feisty here for sure.
Okay, that works too.
And just to forewarn you, that one slide was widescreen again, so it was cutting off. So
okay,
yeah. But this one looks good, so I'm not sure how it'll play out. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So again, caution there. Like I said, I had some technical difficulties. Things are not quite displaying correctly. My apologies. As someone who is really detail oriented, this is causing me a little bit of pain, but hopefully we'll get through it together. So I just encourage you to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. And then if you want additional insights into the labor market or are, a HR or TA leader or work closely with the HR or TA leaders in your organization, follow our Insights newsletter where I produce twice monthly reports about labor market conditions, what's going on, what the most recent jobs reports mean for those groups and what they mean for businesses, as well as some more tactical pieces for HR leaders regarding pay transparency, why it's important to establish pay bands, how to craft a good job description, and some data behind those things as well. So at LaborIQ, some of you may be familiar, we are a compensation software platform where HR and TA leaders use our data for salary benchmarking. We have we provide a recommended salary, so not just, hey, here's an aggregate from a traditional salary survey of what a bunch of accountants in Denver have made, but what if you're hiring an accountant today, it doesn't really matter what the folks that were hired 6 months or a year ago are making. What do you need to pay to be competitive in today's market? We also provide salary forecasting to determine your budgets for merit planning, especially as we've seen compensation demands rise and not really cool as much as some of the rest of the labor market metrics that we study. It's really important for businesses, HR and TA leaders to stay on top of the compensation for retention, as well as bringing new folks in the door. We also provide salary ranges and have some new innovations coming down the future related to pay bands, establishing pay bands to meet pay transparency regulations. And also when it comes to pay transparency, we've seen a big shift from businesses being required to provide pay ranges in their job postings by legislation to actually starting to choose to do that on their own, because it's what the talent in the market is demanding from businesses if they want to be competitive in the hiring market. So starting off, let's get into the labor market. And I think this will kind of set the stage for what we expect to see going forward and the rest of our conversation this morning. So what trends are going to impact the labor market throughout the rest of 2024? We've only got a few short months. It feels wild to say that. It feels this year has been, one of the, blink of an eye. Things have changed so much. The first thing is the labor market is cooling. I don't think that will come as a surprise to anyone here who's a leader in their organization. Hiring has, one of the good parts about this is that hiring has normalized to more sustainable levels. We are no longer seeing HR teams and businesses kind of on the back foot when it comes to their talent acquisition and headcount planning. We're seeing more normalized levels of job quits. We're seeing hiring at pretty much on pace with like pre-pandemic trends, maybe a little bit cooler than that. Unemployment has gone up, but the labor market remains really tight by historical standards. Like I said, voluntary turnover has slowed from the Great Resignation in 2021 and 2022, when businesses were adding all of those jobs back following the pandemic. The other piece we've seen a major trend over the last 12 to 18 months is that a handful of industries, even as only a few industries, have really dominated when it comes to hiring. The majority of jobs added over the last couple of years have been concentrated in just a few industries. And you can see there, healthcare has been one of them. There's a few reasons for that. There's been a little bit of a pandemic bounce back after facing burnout. We also just have an aging population. The demand for healthcare workers is just through the roof. And every time, almost to a T, I will be speaking with folks across all different industries. And the folks that are working in healthcare have just such a different set of problems right now than folks in other industries who may be, on the cooling side. They're not hiring as much. Maybe they're backfilling some open roles. But when it comes to healthcare, there is still big issues with turnover, still big issues with compensation, issues with talent attraction and retention that we're just not seeing in other industries. And it's just there's the dynamics in healthcare and a few other industries are really different right now from what we're seeing in the majority of industries. Most industries are still adding jobs, but the pace has slowed. So the good news is that we haven't seen a lot of mass layoffs. We haven't seen that unemployment rate tick up, but a lot of industries are just in that treading water place. They're hiring at replacement. Someone leaves for a new opportunity, or there are a few layoffs, but maybe you're doing a restructuring and you let go some of your marketing team, but you're adding in your accounting or tech or some other department. So we're not seeing a whole lot of backsliding, but it's a lot slower, lagging, treading water than what we were seeing in 2021 and 2022. And finally, despite the cooling labor market, one of the challenges that will be facing US businesses over the next 5 or 10 years is just a lack of available talent. So the labor force is not growing fast enough to keep up with what will be business demand going forward for talent. We have an older population that is much larger than the younger population, a lot more boomers than we do have Gen Z. And so there are just a lot of trends of headwinds for hiring and business growth going forward when it comes to the talent side. Part of this is also leading to the pressure on wage growth that I was talking about earlier, that wages have not come down to the extent that we've seen hiring and other labor market indicators come down consistent with a cooling economy. So it's just something for businesses to watch out for going forward, that we might not be back in a 2 to 3% wage growth for a good amount of time. So let's get into that with a little bit more of a labor market overview. So that kind of we just set the stage for trends that we expect to see going forward. But the labor market has really outperformed expectations. As I mentioned earlier, different industries are telling a different story. So the big theme that I've had for 2024 is that job growth is normalizing. You can see kind of going back to 2015 all the way through our LaborIQ 2025 forecast. Hiring in the pre-pandemic era was around 190, 200,000 jobs on average, new jobs gained every month. In 2020, we saw that massive 20 million jobs lost overall, averaged about 800, which averaged out to about 800,000 jobs lost per month, even though they started recovering quickly. And then in 2021, we were at 600,000. That hiring back those 20 million people happened very swiftly. And HR teams were tasked with 600,000 jobs added per month. And so that's cool slightly to about 400,000 in 2022. We're through the first 10 months, so through October of 2024, we're averaging right around 170,000 new jobs per month. So definitely a little bit lower than what we saw pre-pandemic, but still in line with what would typically be considered a solid labor market. And then in 2025, expect figures to look pretty similar to how they've looked this year, as long as the big caveat there is there's a lot of unknowns as we head into 2025. And if we stay on the current trend, at least through the beginning of the year, we should be on this kind of steady normalization pace. So yeah, things got a little wonky in this graph here with some of my resizing, but so we were just looking at the average monthly gains. But when you look at, year over year, 12-month totals, it tells a similar but almost different story. So hiring today looks and feels a lot different for folks than it did, in 2021 and 2022. And so over the last, year or so, I work directly with HR and talent acquisition leaders. And one of the big things to reconcile was their feeling of what was going on in the labor market was not really matching the headline numbers that we saw. And I think, for those of us who've been following, I'm sure that the election, you can see a lot of that in how folks voted, because people's perceptions of the economy were different from what the headline numbers were telling us. So in 2022, you imagine yourself as an HR leader, as a US business, you're tasked with, hiring 14 million new workers. You're organizing remote work and hybrid work for your entire organization. You're handling the aftermath and trying to figure out how to be proactive in the midst of the Great Resignation, and making sure that you're keeping up with the wage demands to attract talent, retain talent. And things just really decelerated in terms of hiring, because we were on a path to normalization. But if you're, walking down the street and you fall off a cliff that looks like this, it feels like a tumble. It doesn't feel like that soft landing that we've achieved. But the pain for a lot of, especially HR teams and businesses, has been real. And one of the great things about working directly with HR leaders is that they're on the front lines of the labor market, and they tend to be kind of a leading indicator of where sentiment is and where things are going. But as I mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, Mallory, sorry, I don't know if this is a good point in the presentation to ask the question, but we've seen some headlines from major organizations that are requiring employees to return back to the 5-day in-office work weeks, and those grab the headlines. How does that show up in the data that you're seeing? Do you think there is a shift to more in place at work 5 days a week movement, or is that just a blip of some large companies?
It feels to me like it's a blip of some large companies, but we'll see going forward, I would say. So I didn't include it in this presentation, but that's a really, really good question. So a while back, in the last 6 months or so, I think Gusto and some work from home researchers did a survey of large businesses and across the US, but across the globe. But the large US businesses, basically, they're, going 5 years ahead. So there were like 2028 forecast for their level of, hybrid and remote work was pretty much unchanged from where they are today. So again, that might, maybe things will shift. Maybe there will be a change as, the balance of power shifts between employees and employers. I think the other challenge, and we'll get to this as we talk about the talent shortage that we face, is that for certain locations that lost a good amount of their workforce, I live in the DFW area, one of the fastest growing metros in the country, for those areas in California, New York, parts of the Midwest, that lost population is, going to a 5-day in office. Is that even going to be feasible given the disconnect between what employers seem to want in some of these regards and what employees want? I think some of the housing market dynamics could also make that challenging. So we can get into that a little bit later, but right now I would say it feels like the headlines are very, obviously jarring, and they're really large companies that could shift momentum. But from the evidence that I've seen so far, it feels like we're kind of on a holding pattern there for at least the next years.
All right, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the soft landing. We talked about the going from 14 million hires a year to 2 million on a trailing 12-month basis. What does that mean for businesses? And obviously that feels like a shift. But when you look at when you exclude a few industries, so healthcare, leisure and hospitality, and government have added the lion's share of jobs over the last 12 or so months, the numbers start to look a little different, which explains why folks not in healthcare, why folks, not in government or leisure and hospitality are feeling a different labor market. It's because, when you look at overall aggregate job growth, we're, on par with where we were when the economy was really strong before the pandemic. But when you start looking at private sector growth, it's a lot more sluggish, and people are really feeling that, especially businesses and the folks that I work with, HR and TA leaders. So again, a little bit of wonkiness here. Sorry about the aspect ratio kind of being a little off. But when we look over the last 12 months, only 4 industries added 75% of all new jobs. So that's healthcare, government, social assistance, which healthcare and social assistance are typically combined. So if you were to look at that aggregate total, we're close to 1 million jobs for that industry alone, and then leisure and hospitality. So I think let's take healthcare aside. Healthcare, there's some long-term demographic trends. There's also the pandemic burnout that's led to kind of a resurgence in healthcare labor demand. And government and leisure and hospitality have been adding jobs, although leisure and hospitality in last month's job report was not quite as strong. But healthcare and leisure and hospitality and government are 2 industries that really, really struggled during the Great Resignation, during that hiring boom following the pandemic, because those are industries that typically, number one, don't pay well. Leisure and hospitality obviously had an additional kind of pandemic related risk with, in-person places, things being shut down, all of that type of stuff. But those are also industries, government especially, that didn't pay well. I work with a lot of nonprofits, and you know, I liked, or not like to think, it's unfortunate that when, oftentimes we get new clients and they're an indication of where there's pain in the market because they're struggling to understand the compensation for the roles that they're hiring, and why they are unable to retain talent. And over the last few years, there's been a real trend in nonprofits struggling on the compensation front because they're being outbid. If someone is an accountant, they can be an accountant at a nonprofit, they can be an accountant at a tech company. And if tech companies were paying 3x what the nonprofit was paying, regardless of how important the mission of that nonprofit, people are focused on their pocketbooks. And really, there's just been a lot of dynamics at play that have contributed to this trend. But as I mentioned before, there's these few industries that are accounting for basically 3/4 of all jobs added. Then everywhere else is just in the treading watermark. Couple things to note with manufacturing. I would expect that to look a lot different, even for like the trailing 12 months as we go into November, because the Boeing strike just ended. There was about, at least 30,000 manufacturing workers who were unemployed last month due to a work stoppage or labor dispute. So that number probably is closer to zero or just a little bit negative. Still not great, but the 50K is probably a little bit of an outlier. So as we think about industries, let's look toward the future of what types of jobs are expected to dominate in the next decade, especially. So put yourselves in the shoes of your TA folks on your team, or even especially if you're in a recruiters or external recruiting who are looking to really understand how to keep their business competitive for 2025 and beyond. These are the types of jobs that expect the largest kind of net gains over the next decade. So every year the BLS releases kind of a 10-year forecast of what jobs are expected to be the hottest for the next 10 years. So you can see how to organize these into major categories. We've got healthcare. So one thing to note here, home health and personal aids are expected to be the largest single job gain category by nearly 3x the next closest occupation or job type, adding almost 1 million new home healthcare aides over the next decade to help with our aging population. Despite some of the weakness that we've seen in tech over the last couple of years, those types of roles are still in really, really high demand and will be for the next decade. So regardless, yes?
Jumping in like you asked. So back to the home health, like, because it's one thing to forecast demand for the roles, but, and I don't know if y'all have insights but how do you forecast, or what's the forecast for supply of the role?
Yeah, so I think that is another challenge. And I don't have data on that in front of me, but I know for a lot of jobs on this list, the supply for these roles is diminishing. This wasn't my unique research. I imagine that comes into the calculation a little bit. But for example, I know home health aides, I know nurses, I know accounting. Those are all jobs that have had really, really tough times with a, basically, like, I don't want to say a brain drain, but there are not enough people being educated in those fields to meet what businesses need right now. So that actually, transitions nicely into a point that I wanted to make is a lot of these jobs, if you look for the most part, are roles that don't necessarily or wouldn't necessarily need to require a 4-year degree to do. So like, even accounting, there's been the focus on, apprenticeship programs for a lot of these, for training programs, for certifications. What are some alternative ways to get folks educated and prepared to work in these fields that don't require a traditional expensive 4-year education? I think those are some trends that I would certainly expect to see over the next decade, given where the likely, to your point, supply and demand mismatch is for some of these roles. And, even in my personal experience, I work with I oversee a data team. We have a data engineer on my team who, was in college during COVID. It was a really tough time, taught himself coding while he was working part-time, and is now a data engineer at a startup, who is basically, the equivalent of, someone who's gotten a data science degree or computer science degree in college, but doesn't have the 4 years of formal training that we might have expected a few years ago. Did that answer your question a little bit?
It does. I mean, I guess part of industry, depending on which company you're at, this could be an opportunity.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
a challenge.
Yeah, for companies that are willing to invest in the training, on the job training, or certifications for their employees, willing to bring in people who maybe don't match the traditional requirements that they would have for a role. I think that will be a key in hiring for the next bit, because education is also just changing. It's become a lot more expensive, and the cost benefit isn't there for a lot of employees. Right. So as we think about the next, year or so, what are some trends that we should be watching when it comes to industries and just the labor market in general? So in the short term, we've got interest rates. Obviously the Federal Reserve has been cutting rates. That trend should probably continue. Well, depending on what happens with inflation, maybe it'll be accelerated even more. We've had, years now of international conflict. So we've had the wars in the Middle East and Russia and Ukraine. The good news so far has been that the U.S. economy, for the most part, has been a little bit more insulated than what we've seen in across Europe and Asia. We've got a more diversification of our economy is better. We've got our own energy supply, we've got our own food supply, and we've been less kind of prone to shocks there. Not that we haven't been impacted, obviously. And then, obviously we just had government shutdowns have been kind of on the docket every 3 to 6 months. That can really change what happens. And then we've got the election. So obviously we just elected Donald Trump as president. He'll take office in January, and seeing what happens with the policies that he puts forth and what impact those will have on mainly inflation. But, there's a lot that could potentially change. I would just say, it will likely take time for these things to have an impact. So at least for the first 3 to 6 months of 2024, I would say we're on the current path. We're still on that path, and we'll be evaluating. I'm sure your business will be evaluating our forecasts going into mid 2025 as we see the impacts or potential impacts for any new policies. And then in the long term, saying it again, beating a little bit of a dead horse, but healthcare is going to drive job growth as an aging population increases demand. We've got labor shortages that are leading to turnover not quite coming down as much as we'd expect, and wage growth persisting at higher levels than we thought maybe a few years ago. AI and automation are still presenting opportunities and challenges for a lot of businesses that are trying to wrap their head around how to use these, effectively, ethically, how to meet the demand that consumers have in this area. All questions that, a lot of businesses are grappling with. And then I guess this is maybe not as long-term anymore. We'll see what happens with the shifting of administrations, but with some of the legislation that was passed in the Biden administration, there's a lot of long-term spending on construction, infrastructure, manufacturing to work on that supply chain diversification, onshoring some of those technological manufacturing, chips manufacturing companies. So still seeing that investment carrying forward with construction jobs, especially in manufacturing roles going forward. Let's get into the talent shortage. So it can really feel counterintuitive as the labor market is cooling to say, and to kind of be sounding the alarm about a potential shortage of talent over the next, 5, 10 years, or indefinitely, really, unless we kind of figure things out. But our demographics are just there. And, it also is a little counterintuitive to, talk about conflicting signs in hiring and turnover, but I think this really helps illustrate. So if you're putting yourself in the shoes of an HR or TA leader, what they're feeling and why it might still be hard to find talent, even though the labor market is cooling. So separating this into two parts. So if you look at business decisions, we've got hiring and layoffs. These are, decisions that businesses are making about their headcount. When you look at hiring, it looks, we're heading, on a pretty steady downward path. It'll probably start to normalize soon, but, on a path that's looking, not dissimilar to levels that we saw, approaching the Great Recession, or just coming out of it. But so that looks like we're headed toward a certain downturn. But when you look at layoffs, they are well below historic lows. Those look like, we are in a boom time. Employers are holding on to the talent that they have. But that also creates shortages for workers because you don't have as many active job candidates looking for a role. And with, some uncertainty in the market right now, workers are making the decision to not quit. Not only businesses aren't hiring as much, they're not backfilling open roles as much because they're not, conducting layoffs, and workers are staying put in their jobs at a still more elevated rate than we saw, even in the years leading up to the pandemic. But we've seen a much steeper decline in the quits rate than we kind of expected probably going into this year.
And so, do you think, sorry, another question. Yeah. I'm putting you on the spot here, but you're an economist. You're used to making assumptions. So how much of that is triggered, like the uncertainty of the election, right? But now that maybe everyone's taking a big sigh of relief and we know our fate, that people are now like, okay, maybe I'll take more chances. I mean, you think there'll be less friction on that?
I'm not sure. I still feel like, at least, from what I've seen and heard, there's still a bit of uncertainty to see kind of the actual policy proposals and the actual things that the administration will do going into early next year. We've seen some indications of businesses offsetting potential impact of tariffs by placing new orders for inputs right now. So if they're doing that, they might be slowing down on hiring plans to offset those costs. I've heard kind of conflicting evidence on this, and I think it's probably just there's more certainty like now than there was a week ago, so people know what the next, or have a better idea of what the next 4 years will bring, which, regardless of how they feel about the outcome of the election, less uncertainty is always better for business planning purposes, as we all know. I don't know if that answered your question, but at least hopefully gives like a little bit of perspective on different ways that I've seen and heard businesses and workers reacting to the change.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So despite all of this, we haven't seen the unemployment rate tick up to the level that we would have expected, in 2023 or early 2024. So yes, the unemployment rate has gone up, but 4.1% 5 years ago would have been considered a phenomenally great unemployment rate, full employment, excuse me. And even though we've seen some softening there, it has been pretty steady in recent months. And for many key types of jobs, especially your office type, your highly educated, highly paid professional, business workforce, the unemployment rate for these types of jobs remains incredibly low. So, we've got architecture and engineering at 2%, legal is less than 2%. For some of these, when you break it down by gender, I think the unemployment rate for women legal professionals has been, close to 0% over the last couple of years, that there basically are no, women lawyers who are unemployed and want a job who don't have one. So this just helps illustrate why, even though it's the labor market is cooling, businesses are hiring less, for those that are looking to bring in talent, it's really difficult. And that gets back to the question of even thinking about remote work. So why does remote work get perpetuated even though businesses otherwise might not want that as a situation? So a former colleague, someone that I've worked really closely with and still present with to this day, works for a software company based out of Arizona, but out of Phoenix, but he lives here in Dallas. And he's a chief economist at that organization. And he's saying, going forward, our accounting team, our marketing team, for those professional workers, like Phoenix is a growing market. We can find a marketing manager, a social media manager, a bookkeeper to be based in our Phoenix office. But for specialized, vice president, SVP, C-suite roles, they're still open to those folks being remote because it's so highly specialized. The housing market is so challenging. People, the last few years have been tumultuous enough. You don't need to move your family across the country, and businesses are kind of walking that tightrope of, where can I find talent? What is reasonable? And they, if you find the best person for the job, and that person's gonna be traveling 50% of the time anyway, does it really make sense for them to relocate their entire family to across the country for a job where they're going to be there, 1 day a week? So businesses are making. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mallory, just to interject. Arel Anderson has a great question, and I think it goes back to a comment that you made maybe on the past slide about staying put. And so
yeah,
her question was, are employees staying put knowing that they want to leave? She's just trying to understand the comment about staying put.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, of people that it's, changing jobs, as we all know, isn't always, the grass is not always greener. So employees are making that calculus that you really need to be, or my instinct is that you would really need to be sure that this is a much better opportunity. And since there are just fewer opportunities out there, it's kind of probably a both, right? They're not looking as much, right? They're not out there seeking new opportunities because their current job is safe, or they feel okay there and they know it'll be fine, versus, and then there's just fewer opportunities to seek out. I think it's a combination of both of those factors of, fewer open jobs, fewer new opportunities, and then the feeling of safety and realizing the grass might not always be greener. And if you move to an opportunity that's less certain, are you putting yourself at risk because you might not be able to find a job after?
Great. Yeah. And she says, thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. So as I mentioned before, we've got some demographic trends that are contributing. So we've got short term, we can understand why there might be a little bit of a talent shortage, why it's still hard to find folks to fill open roles. In the longer term, we've got an aging population. So going back from about 2000 to 2020, the US under 18 population grew by less than 1 million, so by about 812,000 individuals. And the over 65 population grew by almost 21 million. So when you think about succession planning in your business, when you think about, how your future management will look within your organization, how to promote from within, this dynamic will be at play for a lot of businesses. And that's not to say, there are plenty of, folks who are 65 and older in the labor force contributing, but that won't, there will be a time where those folks start to retire. And I don't know that enough businesses have kind of thought through what that looks like, what that bridge looks like for, training new leaders who don't have 40 years of tenure at your company, who have, millennials less so, but Gen Z employees that have job hopped a lot more might have less institutional knowledge. How do you build that up within your current teams, provide that training, provide, some of that knowledge transfer as we see shift in the demographics in the US? And so finally, this one, or not finally, but one of the big can be an elephant in the room when it comes to our population growth is migration. This can be, as long as I've been, speaking on the labor market, I've been talking about migration. It is obviously such a political hot button issue. But at the end of the day, for our labor force to grow, it is a numbers game. And if we are not on a path to increase our population naturally. So our births are outpacing the folks that pass away. And the only way we'll continue to, have, even a semblance of population growth is through some form of migration. And you can see this headline from CNBC, immigration reform is the answer hiding in plain sight when it comes to our population growth and our labor force growth. So just taking a step back at this chart. So the light blue represents the net immigration. The dark blue represents the births minus deaths, so the natural population growth. You can see as we start to get past, mid 2030s, late 2030s into 2040s, that births minus deaths, there will be fewer people being born than are passing away, and our population will start to decline without any international migration into the US. So for businesses, I feel like this is a case where really fighting for some sort of hopefully common sense approach to allowing folks here to do the work that we will need to do to keep our economy growing is going to be something we're going to need to figure out, even if we don't want to, or the politicians don't want to.
Mallory, is the drop as you go past this year related to anticipated policy from the administration?
I don't know. This was produced before any of that. I'm sure there was some political piece there, but no, this was produced, I think, in the last 12 months or so. But in general, this is the path that we've been on.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Mallory, we have two questions. We have one from Mike Quigley, and Holger has a question, but Mike was first up. Mike, are you able to come on audio?
Yeah, my question about the aging workforce is that uniquely a United States issue, or does Europe have the same situation?
No. Europe, if anything, the US is because of our being a destination for folks around the world, the US is actually, because of migration, is on the orange line is less bad in the US than you would see in other countries. But yes, from a birth rate perspective, I believe we're on par with where Europe is at, maybe slightly better than Europe right now, because we do have some places like where I am in Texas where the population is a little bit lower, people are having kids at higher rates, etc. But in general, yes, we're on a similar path to what we see in parts of Western Europe, probably not quite as drastic yet as what we've seen in parts of Asia, like China, Japan, South Korea. Is there another question?
Yeah, Holger. Yeah, go ahead, Holger.
Yeah, I was wondering if the aging population is also an opportunity to tap into a workforce that's available to work part-time. We had some success, like, for example, with retired military employees who worked well as additional support. They work full-time, but even some others we brought back from retirement and hired them part-time. So that worked out pretty well as well.
Yeah, no, I've actually gotten that question at previous webinars, actually, from folks that are really focused on issues of ageism in the workplace. And I certainly think throughout the next, 5, 10, maybe even 15 years, that's an opportunity. But at some point, you're not going to have someone who's 95 working in there. But yes, no, I agree. I think in the short term, businesses, relying on that seasoned talent that may not want to work full time is a great, a great opportunity.
I would work for Holger if I was 95. I'm just gonna say.
All right. Well, good to know. Yeah.
So I have a question, one more question regarding this. What is it going to do to our labor rates? Because it seems like when you, if the supply is going to go down, the rates are going to go up. And like you said earlier, the years of the 2 to 3% increases are gone. It's going to be the higher interest rates, because it seems like the salaries are it's just constantly going up and up and up and up, and there's no stopping it.
Yeah, I think that has been the kind of, not, I wouldn't say caution, but just the reality that I've been trying to explain is, to business and HR leaders over the last year or two, as we look at this demographic kind of cliff, some people have called it, but that is a reality that in order to keep the economy growing, we're going to need to, that supply and demand are a little bit out of whack, and that's going to drive prices, which in this case is wages up at a rate that we haven't seen. I don't have any additional insights there other than, yes, that's the projection, at least right now, unless something changes. All right. So similar to when we look on the national scale about migration, when we look within the US, that's also tends to be what's driving regional economic growth. So you can see places like, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Idaho. So on the left, the map shows population growth rates from April of 2020 to July of 2023. And then on the right, it's the net migration over that same time period. So not quite apples to apples, but it gives you a little bit of both perspectives, not just, on a relative basis, how places are doing. You can see Idaho and New York kind of stand out for opposite reasons. And then on a, absolute basis on net migration, we've got, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, those Sunbelt states really strong. And then your New Jersey, Louisiana, Illinois, New York, California have had, basically net out migration over the last 3 years.
Can attest to the population growth in Houston. Way too many cars nowadays.
Yes, ditto in Dallas. I know. All right. So as we think, what is that doing to trends over time? And this tends to be a pretty kind of shocking display. We've got a couple of different examples of how some of these population, internal migration. So, within the United States, how some of those dynamics are impacting labor market. So let's go back to 2009, obviously Great Recession kind of at its peak. The labor force in Dallas, and these got a little wonky, but the labor force in Dallas was just a little bit above what we saw in Washington, D.C. They were on par. They had around 3 million workers, either employed or unemployed and looking for work in each of those metros. And Chicago had nearly 5 million. So Dallas was, you can see the trajectory following the recovery from the Great Recession. Dallas is starting to kind of pick up a little bit, of steam from Washington, D.C. That growth rate is pretty strong. Washington is kind of flat. There's a lot of, government stuff going on at that time too. And then Chicago, again, pretty flat. Does anyone want to guess what the next kind of 10 to 15 years are expected to look like for these metros?
I think Dallas would go up, DC down, and Chicago up?
Not quite, a little bit, actually. So DC actually gained a little bit, but, Dallas went from being 1.5 million fewer workers than in Chicago, and now has about like 100,000 fewer workers than, or, a couple 100,000 fewer workers than Chicago. And at some point in the 2030s, Dallas is likely to overtake Chicago as the third largest metro in the country after New York and LA. So we've seen a huge swing in these Sunbelt states, and a similar trend you can see here with Phoenix. So these got, like I said, a little wonky, but Phoenix in orange, Detroit in the kind of medium blue, San Francisco in the dark blue, and Boston in the lightest blue. Phoenix and Detroit started in 2009, right around 2 million in their labor force. Boston and San Francisco each a little bit more. And, over the last couple of years, Phoenix has overtaken San Francisco, and again, will likely overtake Boston in terms of metro size by, 2030 or so. So the Sun Belt growth, cannot be overstated. It has really created shifts in population. And as someone just mentioned, traffic in those areas has gotten horrendous. Housing prices have grown, still not as expensive as San Francisco, Boston, or New York, but certainly not the affordable metros they were a decade ago. Maybe Phoenix less so than Dallas or Houston or especially Austin, but there have been a lot of shifts in. And again, how does that perpetuate or not remote work when, the working population in Dallas has increased by nearly, 1.2 million, and Chicago's has only increased by a couple thousand over the last decade? How does, do companies in Chicago that are growing, how do they find that talent when, some of those folks have probably moved to Dallas? Are they looking to hire remotely in another metro? Are they, in some cases, moving their headquarters to places like Dallas or Phoenix or Houston? There have been a lot of shifts that have driven some of these changes, but they do present challenges for the metros that have not grown as quickly compared to places like, obviously there are different challenges in places like Dallas and Phoenix that have grown, almost exponentially. And again, kind of starting to wrap up a little bit, but this is an example that tends to really resonate. And if you have HR folks or work with TA folks or work with external recruiting teams, and they're saying, hey, what are your criteria for this job? I am not able to find someone. This is a really tall task. The labor market is really tight. I know people are cutting back on hiring, but that accounting management, that VP of accounting that you're trying to hire, this is a really tough search. So setting the stage, you're in DFW, you're looking to hire maybe a VP or director or manager of accounting. So taking a step back, the entire US, there are about 10 million workers who are in a management role. About 500,000 of those might work in accounting. About 14,000 of those are in DFW, and around 200 are unemployed and looking for a new job. And when it comes to that, so it's like, well, are you hiring a VP? Are you hiring a director? Are you hiring a manager? Do you work for a software company and need someone who has, extensive experience in subscription and recurring revenue? Do you need someone who has, government contract expertise? Do you need someone who has, expertise in international accounting and manufacturing? All of these things are still not taken into consideration. And we're down to a talent pool who are unemployed and seeking work, right? There's still the passive talent pool where you can poach someone, but unemployed and seeking work is around 214 people. And probably only a handful of those meet the specific criteria you need if you're looking to hire someone in that role today. So when, your TA teams or your external recruiting teams come to you saying this is a hard search, this is the reality that they're facing in today's market, even in a slowing, cooling market.
Mallory, I just to jump in here, I wonder if we're at a crossroads. Obviously the demographic changes in the U.S. We can't easily overcome those. That's going to be a reality. It almost feels like we need a renaissance in productivity and efficiency, how we look at work, and I think AI has an opportunity to soften some of that demand, but I think there's going to be a lot of, we as a country or as society, we're going to have to figure it out because you just have to, right? And I think at every point in our history, we do figure it out. So these are some staggering hills to climb, but what do you just?
Your point is very well taken on AI having, or that those types of technological advancements having the potential to like kind of soften the blow of the demographic challenges that we face, right? Because there clearly are more jobs than we have, or more jobs than we will have people to do them. But there is the chance that AI could take some of those roles and soften the demographic cliff a little bit that we do face. That will obviously, as with every technological advancement in the past, involve substantial, retooling, reskilling, support to workers whose jobs have been impacted, and it won't be an easy task to do efficiently, humanely, to maintain people's employment status and livelihood, but that it does have the benefit of softening that cliff. But yeah, there will need to be some sort of reckoning as with all of this. All right, and I'll just get into wrap up. We can go through just back to a summary of where we are and what what things will continue to impact businesses. I did a webinar last week about the election, and all of this still holds regardless. I think it's really important because there's a lot of angst and excitement on any side of the election and how it might impact your business, your family, all of that. But at the end of the day, there are a whole lot of underlying conditions that maybe policy can change on the margin, but some of these are likely to just persist regardless of who was elected. And now we obviously know who that was, but of the outcome of that election, right? We've got a talent shortage. Unemployment will likely continue to tick up, right? We've been on a good path for the economy. Regardless, I had said this last week before the election, but regardless of who's elected, the total number of jobs gained over the next 4 years is likely to be lower than what we saw over the last 4 years, just because we were adding 20 million jobs that were lost from the pandemic, right? Presidents inherit the inertia of their administration. So we'll likely see that continued cooling, unemployment maybe ticking up or not going down. Wage growth, as we've talked about, given some of these demographic challenges, is likely to persist at a level that not a lot of businesses have accounted for. So far, recession fears remain at bay. Again, things can change. External forces, internal forces, who knows, can change that trajectory. But right now, there's no indication that we are, headed towards some sort of economic catastrophe. Businesses continue to backfill open roles and add new jobs just at a lower pace. Layoffs are really, really low, as we saw, despite headlines, and voluntary turnover is down. Again, these things are unlikely to meaningfully change over the next year or so. That is it. Are there any additional questions? I might stop sharing my screen so that I can see everyone's face as we have a discussion and start wrapping up.
All right, who's going to be the first?
I'll jump in. Is there any going back kind of to the wage question? Any estimations on like raise increases? Because like you said, 2 to 3% isn't right. Because yeah, I'm trying to budget for next year and trying to figure out what is a reasonable amount, and it's just such a hard. It's like, well, we'll pay what the market. Wow, what does the market pay? So I'm trying to estimate, and I'm like, is a 4%? I'm sorry, I'm in a software company.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley.
No. That is a question.
So it's just like in tech.
You're at a company. I'm so sorry. It cut out. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, I'm in a software tech Silicon Valley company, and so there's always extra pressure in the tech industry. So yeah, I don't any insight on. I don't know if is 4% going to be a reasonable one. I'm hearing loud and clear 2 to 3 is too low to budget. Yeah, 4%
is likely where maybe a little bit lower than that is likely where we'll land overall in the economy by the end of 2025. That's in the realm of our forecast. It would take a lot of softening in wage growth that we've seen, month over month to get below, 3.5% by the end of next year. So, and for tech, again, I'm in the tech industry. I work for a startup based in Dallas. I'd imagine I wouldn't be surprised if the demands were higher, although there has been a lot of softening in tech and in the information industry. So, but yeah, 4% is 3.5% to 4%. I would, depending on your industry, is unlikely to see it getting less than that by the end of next year. I see a hand raised from Arel.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks for everything. I'm in Washington, D.C. I have a question. So and thank you for your presentation. We're struggling with employees that are coming to us with other job offers. And then the VPs are just like, let's just increase their salary, no matter what percentage, 20, 30, 40, whatever percentage, so they could stay. But I'm from the mindset of, even if we increase their salary, they may leave anyway. But, I'm in the consultant industry, so we're really struggling. We're really struggling with that. So I didn't know if you had any type of insight on how to kind of navigate that. I don't even know if it's a question, a comment, but I know I'm struggling with that right now.
Are you in a government consulting industry, or are you kind of ancillary to the federal government, or what kind?
Yeah, somewhat. It's aviation consulting, and so it is part, airlines and part with federal government.
Okay, so there's a lot of highly technical roles that you're recruiting for. Yeah, so I actually was at a conference maybe 6 months ago with folks who were recruiting for like highly specialized engineering jobs in the aviation, manufacturing, weapon systems manufacturing industry, and that your comment sounds like I'm listening to that conversation over again. From what I observed, those are such highly specialized roles that it is almost like there is no, if it's the type of roles that I'm thinking, there is almost no market benchmark to compare it to. And so it's kind of in one of those situations where sometimes it is, what someone asks is what they'll get paid, but you do run the risk. There are a lot of competitors in the industry that potentially could poach them away for a lot of money. I wish I had, better insights or a, magic wand for you, but I definitely think that type of recruiting, those types of highly technical roles that command big salaries is really complicated, because typically you're an N of one for probably many positions that you're recruiting for. There's a handful of people in the country or world that can do that job. And you're competing against a handful of people. So hopefully, I think all I did was confirm what you're feeling, but I don't know that I have a ton of advice, but those dynamics that you're feeling, I've heard before. Like I said, it was like re-listening to that conversation that I had back in April.
Well, thank you. It's helping me shift my mindset and not be so black and white and just figure out how to function in the gray. So thanks for sharing that.
And there is, just as we think about, and I forget what DC's rules are on this, and the federal government is different, and who knows if that changes with the next administration, but pay transparency is a big issue too. So if you bring someone on and they're like, well, I wanted 400,000, and then the person that you just hired last year is paid 300,000 or whatever those numbers are, you then end up with equity, transparency challenges and your pay structures as well. So no easy answers there, but glad I always love to, have someone confirm and affirm my feelings. So hopefully I was able to do that for you.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
More questions for Mallory. I have one, but I'm gonna hold off because I think Diana has a question.
All right.
I'll put Diana.
I mean, I'm just absorbing it all. I'm like particularly struck by the way you so neutrally wove in some of the politics on a week that's so high emotion. I really appreciate that. Even just thinking about conversations around what administrations inherit versus how it looks coming out. So
Yeah.
that's just a comment, not a question. But.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think in some ways it's not easy because everyone has personal feelings about these topics, but at the end of the day, so for context, for Morel, I worked in federal government contracting for, almost 5 years. And at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers, and you kind of need to let them speak for themselves. And you don't gain credibility by presenting a biased view on a topic, because like I said, at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers. I need to be able to guide, HR, TA, business leaders on what, let's operate from a base of reality and make decisions according to that, and kind of take a step back from some of the other pieces. But and I've been talking about migration for 3 years, so it's not just like something I added last week. And
right.
So it's something that we're going to need to face, and it's no point in sugarcoating the challenges that businesses are going to face. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well done.
Other questions for Mallory? I'll jump in with a quick one. So fractional roles. We had a wonderful member here leave and start up Fractionals United, Karina Mickley. Some of you may remember Karina, she's a great COO. And that organization is a firm believer that a lot of us one of these days are going to be fractional, and that organization's based on, like the numbers you presented, the lack of talent. I may work 10 hours a week for this company and 15 hours a week for that company, and maybe we're all consultants. I don't know. What's your viewpoint on that? Are you seeing any effect of the fractional workforce availability in some of these markets that you analyze?
I mean, it's not something that I actively study, but it's certainly something that I've kind of had my eye on. So when it comes to the jobs report numbers that were released last Friday, there's 2 different surveys as part of that. One surveys businesses and says, how many employees do you have right now? And one surveys households and says, are you employed? So you can imagine that person who's a fractional COO or a fractional accounting manager, they're employed in the household survey, but they're a 1099, or they have some other contract with the business. They're not a W-2 employee. So you end up with a little bit of a disconnect there between, those who are part of more of the gig economy and those who are employed, full-time or even part-time directly by an organization. And I don't have anything to say to that other than I think for a lot of businesses, especially small businesses like where I work, we don't need a full-time CFO. Like we outsource some of those tasks because, having an organization directly support you versus paying a 6-figure salary to an individual is, obviously that's just a different type of calculus. And for small businesses, I think it's a great way to bring in, as we said, seasoned talent, folks that maybe don't want to work full-time anymore, who are in that, 60, 65 and older range, who have a lot of experience, but want to work 1 or 2 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And if you need some accounting help, see Victoria. She's on a call. So I'll put a plug in for you today, Victoria. Other questions? Shafiq, I think you came off mute there.
No. I don't have any questions.
Okay. Anyone else with questions? I would recommend reaching out to Mallory. If you have a difficult hire, you think about the time and energy and the money you're going to spend trying to figure out the exact right pay rate and what the market should bear and all that sort of thing. I would seriously consider short-circuiting that and reach out to Mallory. It's what they do. It's what they specialize in. We've had members reach out to Mallory with success in LaborIQ. And so if you're going to spend a few bucks trying to get it right, I would reach out and make sure you're getting it right with the experts in the field. So I'll put that plug in for you, Mallory.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah,
Still feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can even drop my email in the chat if you'd like that as well.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, wonderful. Any other last questions? If not, we'll wrap things up and make sure we get everyone off to an early start for their weekend. Going once, going twice. Okay, just a few notes to wrap things up. Just give me 30 seconds here or so. For those of you in nonprofit, November 14th, I guess that's next Thursday already, we have our nonprofit industry focus meeting led by Kathy Lieberman, excuse me. That's out on our Luma calendar. If you, everyone should be subscribed to our Luma calendar, the CO Forum calendar. November 22nd, Friday this 22nd, we have our executive session. I believe Josh is leading this one on the 22nd. December 6th, our next month's presenter. We have the Art and Science of Mentoring by Steve Moss. Some of you that have been around for a while know Steve. Steve, I think, has been familiar with the CO Forum for at least 15 years or so, and he's going to be talking about mentoring, the power of that. We have another executive session like we do each month, December 20th. So look out for that. And in January, I can announce, pretty excited that we have Jeff Woods, who recently launched a book on AI-driven leadership. And everything seems to be about AI these days, but he's a force in the field, and we're excited that we're able to have Jeff come in January. So we have an actively busy event calendar coming up. I'm also excited to announce that we just formed a relationship with in the terms of a special advisory role with Dr. Bendeley from the Fisher School of Business. He's also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Operations Management. Like, you can't go any higher than that. Like, the academic research that happens around operations and supply chain, he's now on board as an advisor, and he's also looking for COOs to help close the gap between academic research and actual work. And so there'll be opportunities for members that like that want to participate in that. He's also writing a book with a bunch of professors about the historical aspects and how COOs and the mentality of those challenges match up with maybe Napoleon's kind of thing. You know, I don't know, but he's looking for some members to maybe ghostwrite for and get your story into some of the work that they're writing. So I'm excited to have that opportunity in front of all of you. So you'll see more. Check your emails. We'll also put something out on Slack. So I think I said enough. Are we ready for the weekend? So if you would, if you're able to, if you can come off mic or off mute, excuse me, or off, put back on camera. And let's just give Mallory a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Please reach out to Mallory. You'll probably get a follow-up email from her. And everyone, please have a safe weekend. Keep up the great jobs you're doing. You're all in very, very difficult roles. I commend you. Keep your chins up and keep pushing forward. And see you again soon.
Thank you, Mallory. Thank you.
Thank
Everyone.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.